The Queen Elizabeth II has sailed the world longer than any ocean liner afloat. She is the grande dame of the world passenger fleet. The QE2 World Cruise begins and ends in New York, but few people have the time to make the 100-day journey, so segments are sold. We are going to board in Sydney, Australia, then sail on to Melbourne and Perth. From Perth, we will sail to Bali and Brunei, next Manila, and then Hong Kong. Next, we will sail north to Tokyo, returning to Nagoya, then on to Ho Chi Minh City, before stopping in Singapore and heading to Bangkok, the last stop of our trip. Our journey will begin in Sydney, Australia. In the early pre-dawn hours, the Queen Elizabeth II has arrived. She left New York on World Cruise 28 days ago, traveling by way of the Panama Canal, Los Angeles, and Tahiti. She is tied up in Sydney for 2 days next to the Harbour Bridge. She is 67,000 tons, actually rather small by the standards of new ships. But her loyal fans and passengers will tell you that she outshines them all, with a storied history and a style none of the new ships can claim. So welcome aboard the QE2, the most famous ship in the world. Sydney's best-known site is the Opera House. Designed by the Danish architect Jorn Utzon, the design was intended to represent the billowing sails of boats on Sydney Bay. For 3 decades, it has stood as the leading symbol of this city. Before the Opera House was built, Sydney's best-known site was the Sydney Harbour Bridge, built in 1932. Sydney has an expansive skyline, boasting office buildings, new downtown residential districts, and extensive public transportation, including a monorail system that loops through the city, connecting Darling Harbour, the city centre, and Chinatown. The monorail is fast and efficient and allows you to connect with the city buses and ferries, so you can explore the city easily on your own. Sydney began its life in 1788, when the first fleet arrived. The ships were filled not with optimistic new settlers, but rather with convicts from England. Britain used Australia as its penal colony until 1868. The Strand Arcade is one of Sydney's oldest structures. It was built in the mid-19th century in the style of the Grand Arcades of London. Sydney has many sights to see, but for most people, Sydney is about going to the beach. Manly Beach is one of Sydney's most popular beaches. During Australia's summer, the beaches are packed with people who come to enjoy the sea and the sun. Surfing is a national pastime. Australia's eastern shore attracts enthusiasts from around the world. Australia is known for its unusual wildlife. It is one of the most isolated places on Earth. In this isolation developed some of the world's favorite creatures, including the koala. The koala is Australia's most lovable creature. Nocturnal by nature, they are reluctant photo subjects in broad daylight. They move very slowly, they are herbivores, and they eat only one thing: eucalyptus leaves. The eucalyptus leaves metabolize into their body in a way that, well, keeps them high. They may be cuddly, but they are actually pretty loaded. Of all of Sydney's natural attractions, it is the harbour that has made this city so successful. The natural harbor is large and filled with protected coves. Connecting all of the harbor towns are one of the world's largest ferry transport systems. Sydney has more workers who commute by ferry than any other city of the world. Before boarding the QE2 for the Orient cruise, we are going to venture out onto Sydney Harbour and take a look at this remarkable city from the water as we ride a ferry across the bay. We leave Sydney at midnight, sailing south to our first stop, Melbourne. We are sailing through the southern hemisphere in February. It is the height of summer. Passengers relax on the decks, work on their tans, read a book, and settle into the carefree way of life at sea. The QE2 has a large amount of open deck space. Because of this, passengers rarely feel crowded. The pool is large and uncrowded enough to actually swim in. Shuffleboard has always been popular at sea. It was invented on board British ships in the 1870s. A ship needs constant maintenance. The salt air, the spray, and the pounding seas mean that workmen must continually remove rust, touch up the paint, and do dozens of other chores to keep the ship looking good. The bow of the QE2 points south as we sail along Australia's eastern coast. From Sydney, we are traveling to our second stop, Melbourne, Australia's second largest city. Melbourne is a vital city, modern and ranked as one of the most livable cities of the world. Melbourne's quiet civility is best represented by the streetcar. Like Boston or Toronto, the trams are an essential part of Melbourne life. Melbourne is dignified, Sydney is brash. The rattling green trams are a great way to see the city. You can get on or off at many different points and cover the general sights on your own. One of Melbourne's best-known sights is the railroad station. The Flinders Street Station has been a meeting point in Melbourne for over a century. The clocks under the main archway are rotated to indicate the time of the next departing train. "Meet me under the clocks" is a phrase that the people of Melbourne have used for nearly 100 years. Australians are proud of their egalitarian achievements. The majority of Australians are middle class. Social status is of little concern in most of the country, but Melbourne is the exception. Melbourne society has a European-like obsession with class. In a country where convict ancestors are common, Melbourne people pride themselves on the fact that their city was founded by free men and women who came of their own accord. The iron used to decorate these houses was used as ballast in the ships sailing from England a century ago. Outside of Melbourne, you will soon find yourself traveling through the wine districts of Victoria. Australian wines have grown in prominence throughout the world. In autumn, which is February and March here, the grapes will ripen and be ready for harvesting. Melbourne is Australia's second largest city and our second port of call. Back at the Melbourne Pier, passengers will be returning from a day of sightseeing. The Cunard logo looms overhead as passengers make their way up the gangway, tired and ready to reboard the ship. The QE2 continues along the southern coast around the Horn of Australia. We have spent 4 days traveling nearly 2,000 miles to Australia's great western city, Perth. Passengers arrive at Perth's port city of Fremantle. Fremantle is Western Australia's jewel. Modern Fremantle is a far cry from the barren sandy plains that greeted English settlers in 1829. The new arrivals were headed to the Swan River colony. Most were city dwellers not ready for the barren land. Fresh water was 32 miles away. Because of the lack of water, the colony moved upriver to the present location of Perth. Perth is a wonderful modern city. For decades, it was the poor country cousin of Melbourne and Sydney. It did not begin its rapid growth until the mid-20th century. Because of this, Perth was planned. It was laid out to accommodate pedestrians and visitors. Perth's best activity is simply walking. London Court is an arcade running between Hay Street and St. George Terrace. The city boasts many pedestrian malls and streets, as well as an extensive railway service. QE2 passengers will come into Perth from Fremantle on trains that run regularly between the city centre and the port. This is the west coast of Australia. It is rugged and dotted with quiet beaches that run for miles. Driving in Australia presents its challenges. In America, you might see signs warning of deer. In Australia, you are reminded to give way to the kangaroo. The kangaroo is Australia's best-known creature. Because of the isolation of Australia, unusual wildlife has evolved. Kangaroos are marsupials. The female carries the young in her pouch until they were able to fend for themselves. Before people arrived, there were millions of kangaroos. Today they are less common, even in the outback. A female hopping along with her baby in tow is about as Australian as you can get. Perth is Australia's great western city and our last stop down under before we head north to the exotic Far East. From Perth, we are going to travel on one of our longest legs as we make our way to the Indonesian island of Bali. Bali is a tender port. The QE2 is too large to tie up at the pier, so she will anchor offshore and tenders will take people to the dock. Once ashore, passengers will be greeted by Balinese musicians and dancers. They extend a welcome greeting to one of the most idyllic spots on Earth. Few places of the world bring to mind such vivid images as the island of Bali. Towering palms, terraces of rice fields, brilliant blue skies, and a pervading sense of calm are images that travelers have always had. For the most part, those images are true. Few travelers come here and go away disappointed. Yes, there are traffic jams and noise. Not all is idyllic. But compared to the surrounding islands of Southeast Asia, Bali is an oasis of calm in the midst of a storm. Bali is a part of Indonesia, but it is culturally very different, primarily because of religion. The Balinese are Hindu. Their religion is actually a combination of Hindu beliefs with some elements of Buddhism and ancient animist beliefs indigenous to the island. One of Bali's most unusual attractions is the Bat Cave. It is filled with thousands of bats hanging upside down, resting before their nighttime flight into the skies above. Indonesia is enormous. Bali is only a small island 84 miles long in the midst of one of the largest nations of the world. Its Hindu culture stands in sharp contrast to the Muslim culture of the rest of Indonesia. Indonesia comprises nearly 14,000 islands. In the Balinese capital of Denpasar, the traffic is thick and dominated by scooters and motorbikes. Throughout much of this part of the world, scooters and motorbikes provide the main means of transportation. They are noisy and polluting, but they use far less gas to move people around than cars. Denpasar is a market town of about 50,000 people. The largest market is in the center of the city. Women carry baskets atop their heads, and under umbrellas and canopies, everything from spices to silks to fruits and vegetables are traded to local people and visitors alike. The faces of Bali are beautiful. The people are among the friendliest and most gentle in all of Asia. One of Bali's best-known crafts is the art of batik. This ancient skill involves the use of wax and the dyeing of cloth. Wax is placed on the part of the cloth not to be dyed. After the dyeing is done, the wax is removed to reveal the finished design. Throughout Bali, you will see statues of gods and goddesses, strange creatures that are part Hindu and part Balinese. Hindu culture came to Bali in the 9th century. By the 14th century, the rest of Indonesia had been conquered by the Muslims. Aristocrats, scholars, artists, and dancers fled here, consolidating Hindu culture on this island. Temple statues are draped in black and white. These aprons symbolize the balance between good and evil. Balance is the goal of the Balinese. Bali is known for culture, and the best-known part of Balinese culture is dance. The dancers use low and angular movements. Their heads move slowly with their bodies. Their eyes dart back and forth as a part of the choreography. They move dramatically across the stage, their long fingernails and hands telling a part of the story. The dances tell a moral tale. The best-known Balinese dance is the barong dance. It is a tale of good and evil. Good is represented by Barong, a dragon with a flower-bedecked beard. Evil is represented by the witch Rangda. Beautiful female dancers are interwoven throughout the story. Bali is one of the most exotic spots of the world and our 4th port of call on our Orient cruise. At the pier, we board the tender and return to the QE2. With everyone on board, the ship will continue sailing north. The following day, the QE2 is going to cross over the equator back into the northern hemisphere. Passengers who have never been over the line before will kiss the fish and be dunked in the pool. This is a tradition that dates back to the days of the ancient mariners. It is a ceremony that has been handed down from the early explorers to the modern military and to cruise ship passengers and crew on luxury liners like the QE2. The QE2 continues her journey north toward our next port of call, the island of Brunei. As we leave the ship by tender, we are approaching one of the least visited spots of Southeast Asia. Visitors are so uncommon that with the QE2 in port, policemen warn drivers to watch out for tourists crossing. Brunei is a Muslim nation, and Brunei's most amazing sights are its modern mosques. The Omar Ali Saifuddin Mosque was built in 1958 by the 28th Sultan of Brunei. Its golden domes tower over the modern oil-rich town of Bandar. Brunei is one of the richest nations of the world. The wealth is based on oil. The Sultan of Brunei is the richest person on earth. He lives in this gold-domed palace. In this nation, everything is free. Healthcare, education, transportation, there are no taxes. This mosque was built by the 29th Sultan. The interior wall tiles are gold-plated. The massive chandeliers are from Italy. The rugs are from Saudi Arabia. If you visit, you must wear long pants, and shoes must be removed. But non-Muslims are welcome to see these modern treasures of Brunei. Many of Brunei's residents live in homes that are built on stilts out over the water. Walkways connect the houses, and children and adults move between homes using the boardwalks. Boats will take you out into the stilt home communities and will allow you to visit a home and see how the people live. These excursions bring up the question, why, if there is so much money, the highest per capita income in the world, why is a large part of the population living in what we would consider to be substandard housing? Some of it is tradition. Many families have lived in these stilt homes for generations. Brunei is an amazing place. You should visit Brunei if you find yourself in this part of the world. Our tender returns us to the QE2 anchored in the harbor. We reboard and continue on as we leave our fifth port of call, the island nation of Brunei. Back at sea, the QE2 continues through the narrow sea channels past endless islands as we make our way on to our next port of call, Manila. This stop is of average interest to passengers, but for the crew it is the most important stop of the year. The QE2 is staffed by many nationalities, but the largest single group is Filipino. This will be the one time in the year they will be able to see their families. Manila is a big, noisy city choked with traffic and dotted with skyscrapers. It is unique in Asia. The Philippines are often called the Latin America of Asia. The nation is predominantly Roman Catholic. The people are of Malay descent, but 4 centuries of Spanish rule make this place feel very South American. Manila is filled with modern shopping malls, and the whole place feels a little like Southern California. Magellan claimed the islands for Spain in 1512. After defeating Spain in the Spanish-American War, the United States took over. In the Second World War, the Japanese occupied the nation, and finally in 1946, the Philippines elected their own government. Except for the 14-year rule of the dictator Ferdinand Marcos, the Philippines have had a freely elected government. Food stalls cover the sidewalks. The Filipinos are very likely to eat a little bit here and there all the time. Manila has traffic like all cities of the world, but in Manila you will see many things on the roads besides cars. Horse carts are not uncommon in the center of the city. Pedicabs are used by everyone. This is the common man's taxi service in Manila. They are everywhere, and a raise of a hand, like on Fifth Avenue in New York, will immediately get you a ride. If you are visiting here, you can feel perfectly safe hopping into a pedicab. Tagalog is the official language of the Philippines, but everyone speaks English. You'll have no trouble telling the driver where you need to go, and you may have a lively conversation with him along the way. You'll pass everything from great wealth to real poverty, all a part of Manila. But what dominates the streets are the jeepneys. The jeepneys are a key element in Manila's chaotic system of public transportation. They are a hybrid between a bus and a jeep. They carry about 12 passengers, and they are cheap. Each owner emblazons a favorite phrase or name on the top of the cab. They are gaudy beyond words, and they exist only in Manila. The Rizal Monument was built to honor Jose Rizal, a national hero who fought off the Spanish occupiers. Filipinos are bright and cheerful people, and part of that attitude is to compensate for a less than ideal past. The Philippines have been the site of many battles in many wars. The Manila Hotel is the great old hotel of the city. It was here that General Douglas MacArthur had his headquarters before the start of World War II. The Philippines played a major role in World War II. The American cemetery contains the largest number of graves of any World War II cemetery in the world. 17,000 fallen American soldiers lie here, a reminder of a different time. As the day draws to a close, passengers return to the ship. Crew members watch from the bow as their families, who have come to see them off, leave the pier. Many of these people will not see each other again until the QE2 returns to Manila next year. Back to sea, the Queen Elizabeth II sails northwest as we near the mainland peninsula of Asia. Tomorrow we will arrive at our 7th port of call, the meeting place of the East and the West, Hong Kong. Approaching on the south side of Hong Kong Island, towering apartment buildings line the shore. The pilot boat comes alongside to bring on the pilot, who will take command of the QE2 and steer her to her berth. The annual arrival of the QE2 in Hong Kong is still, after all these years, a major event. Fireboats fill the air with plumes of water as they welcome the great grande dame of ocean liners, the Queen Elizabeth II. The QE2 will dock on the mainland side, tying up at the pier in Kowloon. The historic Star Ferry runs across Hong Kong Harbor several times each hour. It still operates, and for a very small fare, you can ride across one of the legendary harbors of the world. Hong Kong is one of the busiest, fast-paced cities of the world. When China regained control after the British lease expired in 1998, there was much concern about what the communists would do with Hong Kong's freewheeling economy. But for the most part, they left it alone. And today, Hong Kong operates much as it did before the British left. For nearly 100 years, the Star Ferry was the only way to get to Hong Kong Island from Kowloon. But in the 1970s, Hong Kong built a tunnel under the harbor, and at the same time, they built a world-class subway system that opened in 1979. Today, that 15-minute ferry ride takes only a few minutes in a train. The system is easy to use and understand. 6 different lines fan out through Hong Kong, including a recently completed line to Hong Kong's Disneyland. And if you are visiting Hong Kong, you'll want to take a ride on the subway. Public transportation is the best way to see local people and get a better understanding of how they live. They are 3-wheeled, unstable, noisy, and you will think they are falling apart. But the tuk-tuks have been moving people around for decades. A good English-speaking driver can give you a wonderful whirlwind tour of the city in these motorized tricycles. Bangkok has no center. The closest thing to a center the city has is the river. The Chao Phraya River is the lifeblood of the city. River buses move up and down the Chao Phraya, letting passengers on and off. And from the river run hundreds of canals that make Bangkok the Venice of the East. One of Bangkok's most interesting experiences is hiring a water taxi to take you through the canals. The water taxis are long boats with majestic prows. The boats are steered by a helmsman who moves the entire engine, which is attached to a long shaft that extends far beyond the boat. They are incredibly noisy, coughing up fumes, but the whole experience is so typically Thai, a combination of frenetic craziness with peaceful solitude. Many of the people of Bangkok live in houses on canals. The homes are built on stilts. People move between the homes using boats. Alongside the houses built on stilts are temples. The temples are called wats. There are over 300 wats in the city, and they are among Bangkok's greatest treasures. Bangkok has some curious attractions. Outside the city, this quaint miniature train will take you and your family to the crocodile farm. An hour out of Bangkok, you can stand beside some of the most astonishing creatures in the world. The farm claims to have 60,000 crocs. I found that hard to believe, but the ones that are there are huge. And every hour there is a crocodile wrestling show. The wranglers, devout Buddhists, say a prayer. And if you believe in reincarnation, you can only hope that you will come back in your next life to an easier job. The crocs are not very cooperative. Ultimately, they have to be carried to the performing space. It is staged, and the crocs are well fed, so there isn't much chance that they will bite off an arm or a head. But it is dangerous, and frankly, I wouldn't want to do it. Animal rights people find it appalling, but the farm claims that they have been conservation-minded, and in fact have saved several species. Back in Bangkok, we are going to visit the city's greatest attractions, its wats. 300 Buddhist temples can be found over the city. Each is stunning. They represent one of the greatest collections of Oriental architecture anywhere in the Far East. The people of Thailand practice Theravada Buddhism. After the death of Buddha, much like after the death of Christ, different sects emerged interpreting the teachings in different ways. Theravada Buddhism is often called Southern Buddhism because it is practiced largely in South Asia. Mahayana Buddhism is referred to as Northern Buddhism. It is widely practiced in China and Japan. Of the 300 wats of Bangkok, one of the most impressive is the Temple of the Dawn. It rises 300 feet above the banks of the Chao Phraya River. The entire temple is decorated with broken porcelain. It was built in the 17th century and is one of the great Buddhist temples of the world. The largest temple of Bangkok is Wat Po. It covers 20 acres. It was the site of Bangkok's first university. It is also the home of the reclining Buddha. This is the largest reclining Buddha in the world. It is 151 feet long. It is plated in gold, and it was designed to illustrate the passing of Buddha into nirvana. Of all of the architectural treasures of Bangkok, nothing rivals the the royal palace. Built under the reign of Rama I, construction began in 1782. This palace stands as one of the great sights of the world. It rivals the Taj Mahal. Giant dragon figures stand guard. They represent mythical figures of Thai history. They stand as permanent sentinels of the great palace halls. Reds, blues, golds, all join together into a rainbow of color in this, one of the most imposing monuments of the great Far East. Millions of visitors come here each year. For the Thai visitors, it is a place of reverence and a time to stop and offer up prayers even while the passing crowds move by. We began our journey 47 days ago. We have seen the Opera House of Sydney, the mosques of Brunei, the Great Wall of China, the Kamakura Buddha, and the Shinto shrines of Japan. But of all of the sights we have seen, the Royal Palace of Bangkok stands as the most stunning architectural wonder of the great Far East. Bangkok is an amazing place, a stop you should make in your travels around the world. From Bangkok, we return to Pattaya and then take a tender back to the ship. From Bangkok, the QE2 will sail on to India before heading to the Suez, the Mediterranean, and on to her Southampton home. The Queen Elizabeth II has sailed the world longer than any ocean liner afloat. She has stopped in more exotic locales, logged more miles, and hosted more passengers than any ship on Earth. She is the grande dame of the world passenger fleet, the last true ocean liner of the world. As the sun sets, passengers will return to their cabins and prepare for the evening's activities. Captain Roland Hassel will host several parties throughout the cruise. Each passenger will be given a chance to meet the captain, have a glass of champagne, and enjoy the elegance of an evening at sea. The captain will speak. He will introduce the senior officers and report on the progress of the ship at sea. After the captain's cocktail party, passengers will move on to the dining rooms. Your dining room will be assigned to you based on the grade of cabin you have booked. The lower-priced cabins will use the Mauritania, the middle-grade cabins will use the Coronia, and the suites will use the smaller and more intimate grills. After dinner, passengers can dance to the music of the QE2 orchestra. Cunard ships have always had the best live music at sea. Of all of the different aspects of running a ship, perhaps the most amazing operation is the galley. The galley staff operate unseen to the passengers as they make tens of thousands of meals for a floating city each day. The staff works around the clock. Pastries and breads are baked early in the day. Other items will be prepared closer to mealtime. And appearance is considered as important as taste. Every plate will be given careful inspection until it is perfect. Each night, passengers are offered a new menu. They will usually select an appetizer, which could be French pâté or possibly smoked salmon. The salmon is sliced razor thin and served in the traditional way with capers and onions. For your entree, you may opt for rack of lamb. The racks of lamb will be prepared early in the afternoon, dusting them in a mixture of spices and coatings. And to make sure you have a wide selection of pastries at tea time, the galley staff will finish baking the pastries at 3:30, so they will be fresh for presentation at tea. As the evening mealtime begins, the serving staff will gather in the galley. Waiters and waitresses will ladle up the soup course and deliver the bowls hot to their tables. Salads come next, and then the chefs will start turning out the entree plates from the hot line. The staff will then make their way through the galley and into the dining room. In the engine control room, the chief engineer will monitor gauges and dials. When the QE2 was launched, she was a steamship. She was powered by turbines that burned oil and produced steam. In 1985, the QE2 received a new power plant, and she became diesel-electric. Today she burns diesel fuel which power electric generators. The electricity then operates motors that turn the shafts and the two propellers of the QE2. On the bridge, Captain Roland Hassel monitors the overall operations. He is the man ultimately responsible for the safety of the passengers and crew. The wheel is much smaller than the wheels of the old Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth, because the giant rudder of the QE2 is operated by hydraulics. The staff captain will oversee the navigation of the ship. Paper charts are still carried on board, but the primary navigational tool today is GPS. Captain Hassel's office is directly behind the bridge. Beside his office are the captain's living quarters. They are large and spacious, and he is allowed to bring his wife on board with him to travel during much of the year. The QE2 is a part of the legendary tradition of ocean liners begun when Samuel Cunard launched the RMS Britannia. This silver cup was presented by the city of Boston in 1840 to commemorate its arrival and the beginning of the transatlantic age. By the turn of the 20th century, great ships like the Mauretania ruled the sea, carrying travelers between Liverpool and New York. In 1934, Cunard launched the first of the Queens, the Queen Mary. She was the largest ship in the world at 88,000 tons. In 1938, the second Queen was launched, the Queen Elizabeth. And in 1969, Cunard launched the third Queen, the Queen Elizabeth II, the QE2, one of the most popular ships of all time. She was smaller at 67,000 tons and designed to serve as both a transatlantic liner and a cruise ship. She was ahead of her time. She was stylish, sleek, and represented the very best in British taste and design. She sails today as an icon of the 1960s, a decade that began the move of the transatlantic liner into the modern age. And each year she circumnavigates the globe on her legendary world cruise. During these days at sea, passengers relax. We have been at sea for several weeks now, and many people will start to spend more time in the library and less time outside on the decks. The QE2 offers different activities, including wine tastings. The QE2 carries a major collection of wine on board, and the chief wine steward will talk about the wines, and passengers will be given a chance to sample the vintages. And at 2 o'clock, it's time for the dance class. Cunard has always had live orchestras and ballroom dancing at night. The instructors will give classes so you can brush up on your steps. You might assume that the women are dancing with their husbands, but not necessarily so. the number of single women on board exceeds the number of single men. So ships recruit gentlemen escorts, or taxi dancers as they are better known. They cruise for almost nothing, and in exchange they are expected to dance with the single women on board. After dance class, it's time for bingo, a tradition on any ship. And after bingo, the cruise director and one of his associates will moderate a game of Trivial Pursuit. And at 4 o'clock, it's time for tea. Tea is a Cunard tradition reflecting their British heritage. Pastries, cucumber sandwiches, and a harp in the background set the mood for this traditional activity each afternoon. And on the deck, the crew will participate in an ice sculpture competition. Ice sculptures are used in the evening buffets and at the officers' cocktail parties. Crew members are each given a block of ice and a set amount of time to fashion their block into an assigned shape. This galley chef is working with a machete to finish off a sculpture of a turkey that will grace the buffet table tonight. The QE2 will be in Hong Kong for several days while maintenance work is being done. So we are going to take this time to travel overland to the interior of China and the city of Xian. China is the largest nation of the world, over 1 billion people. It has also become one of the most popular travel destinations of the world, with China's opening up to the West. We have arrived in March at the beginning of the Spring Festival. Paper lanterns and sculptures decorate the city, and people from the countryside come into Xian to celebrate the end of winter and the beginning of spring. The Spring Lantern Festival marks the end of Chinese New Year. This year is the Year of the Rabbit. The Chinese calendar is divided into 12 years, each named for a different animal. The Chinese people are very friendly. They smile and wave, and it is difficult as a Westerner to stand here and realize that less than 3 decades ago, China was considered a dangerous enemy of the West. It was here in Xian that the Qin dynasty began over 2,000 years ago. The Emperor Qin ruled only 11 years, but he began the formation of China as we know it today. Under Qin, money was standardized. He divided the country into administrative units, and under Qin, the Great Wall of China was begun. These temples date back over 1,000 years. They are a part of China's cultural heritage and were lucky to survive the repressive Cultural Revolution instigated under Chairman Mao. The Great Goose Pagoda was begun in the 7th century. It is one of the most important Buddhist temples in central China. It was considered to be historically important and passed over during the destructive years of the Cultural Revolution. In China, you see many different scenes. Calligraphers practice their skills, and in pottery and porcelain factories, the ancient art of cloisonné continues to flourish. This is a skill that involves working with metal filigree, which is filled in with enamel and polished smooth to create the finished vase. Entrepreneurial barbers set up shop on the sidewalk where you can get a shave and a haircut. The cost is very low, but if you choose to get a clip, don't expect to come out looking like you left a Beverly Hills salon. Although they use clippers and scissors, the overall effect is about the same as using a bowl. China's greatest wealth is its children. Once a nation with a population growth out of control, China's birth rates have actually declined. and the future for many children born in China today is better than at any time in recent memory. East of Xian is the tomb built for the Emperor Qian. People from all over China and the world come to see this enormous tomb. It is filled with thousands of terracotta warriors, complete with horses, weapons, armor, all the needs of an army to protect the emperor in the afterlife. One of the highlights of visiting China is to see one of the lavish cultural shows presented in the major cities. The performance at Xian, produced and sponsored by the Chinese government, is one of the largest and attracts both Chinese and foreign visitors. The dancers, all of them female, perform the traditional ribbon dance in colorful costumes, carrying on traditions that date back centuries. Costumes such as this would never have been allowed during the Cultural Revolution. Drab uniforms and singers and dancers praising the revolution were the only entertainment allowed. China has leapt forward 2 centuries in 2 decades. From Xian, we are going to fly on to our next stop, the capital of Beijing. The Beijing airport is one of the busiest in Asia. Visitors arrive and are processed through customs, then travel down long corridors on moving sidewalks, just as you would find in any major airport of the world. Once you start heading to your hotel, you will immediately notice the size and the newness of the buildings. China has been going through a growing spurt like an adolescent teenager. China has more cars than ever before, but bicycles are still the most common way people get to and from their jobs. In the early morning and late afternoon, the streets are a sea of two-wheelers. And a bicycle ride around Tiananmen Square will take you past the portrait of Mao and the entrance to the Forbidden City, the Gate of Heavenly Peace. In 1406, Ming Emperor Li relocated the capital to this present location. He conscripted 200,000 laborers to build a maze of palaces and halls, all interconnected through tunnels and secret passageways. In 14 years' time, it was completed, and 600 years later, it still stands as one of the great wonders of the world. Miraculously, the Forbidden City has survived through countless wars, earthquakes, fires, and Imperial China's final collapse. It remains the grandest symbol of a fallen empire. The Temple of Heaven is one of Beijing's main attractions. It was built at the same time as the Forbidden City. The temple and grounds were designed with strict adherence to numerology and feng shui. 30 miles outside of Beijing are the Ming tombs. 13 mausoleums are tombs to the emperors of the Ming dynasty, which reigned from 1368 to 1644. A walkway leads to the tombs. It is lined with statues of animals and statues of the emperors themselves. Above Kunming Lake stands a pagoda silhouetted against the sky. It stands in the midst of a park-like retreat. Elaborate painted wooden gates mark the entrance to this imperial compound. A marble boat is anchored to the shore as though it could set sail at any moment. This was the Summer Palace. It was the imperial summer home. It is best known as the home of the Emperor Dowager Cixi, legendary for her tyrannical rule. But China's best-known attraction is a fortress. The Great Wall of China is one of the wonders of the world. It is the only man-made object on Earth visible from space. The wall stretches 2,500 miles. It was built in sections over 2,000 years and many different dynasties. It was intended to keep out marauding nomads from the west. The Ming dynasty committed vast sums of money and manpower to fortify themselves against the restless tribes to the north. The Great Wall of China is one of the best-known travel sites of the world and a highlight of our cruise to the Orient on the QE2.